so. While Karl Marx did not like the Darwinian concept of every man for himself, he found Darwin's theory useful for removing God from the equation and substituting the almighty state as he envisioned it. In communism, the state was God, and literally tens of millions of people have died because of this false belief.
In his book Mein Kampf, Adolf Hitler said, "The purity of the racial blood should be guarded so that the best types of human beings may be preserved, and that thus we should render possible a more noble evolution of humanity itself."
Adolf Hitler relied on evolutionary concepts in his chilling treatise, Mein Kampf. What was the real connection between the horrors of Nazism and the theories of Darwin?
The following contains some graphic scenes. Parental discretion is advised. Perhaps the most evil figure ever is Adolf Hitler. He and the Nazis committed unspeakable actions, crimes against humanity. What link, if any, is there to the theory of Charles Darwin? Dr. Richard Weikart heads the Department of History at the University of California, Stanislaus in Turlock, California. He has written the important new book, From Darwin to Hitler.
Hitler was taking ideas of Darwinism in a certain kind of direction. An important point of Darwinism was that there is no distinction between humans and animals, at least no qualitative distinction. Darwin, in fact, termed it this way: there's a quantitative but not a qualitative distinction between humans and animals.
There was also a sea change with the acceptance of Darwin in how humanity was to view human death itself.
One of the most important ways that Darwinism revolutionized thinking about morality, especially relating to bioethics and medical ethics, was by introducing a new idea of what death is. The Judeo-Christian conception of death is that death is an enemy that is to be overcome and ultimately will be overcome through Christ. But the Darwinian vision is that death is a positive force that brings progress. And in fact, the more death, the more progress. The more people are born, the more variation you have. This gives more possibilities for good variations.
Charles Darwin's theory was not accepted widely at first, but he noticed it began to gain a foothold in Germany, some 50 years before Hitler. And so Darwin wrote, "The support which I receive from Germany is my chief ground for hoping that our views will ultimately prevail." They prevailed in ways unimaginable. To truly understand the atrocities of the Holocaust, one must first understand the major movement which paved the way for it.
Charles Darwin had a cousin by the name of Francis Galton, who took the ideas of Darwin and began to apply them to the realm of genetics.
Dr. George Grant is the author of many books, including Grand Illusions, The Legacy of Planned Parenthood.
Galton wondered, is there a possible way to actually steer evolution through scientific methods so that we actually create a race of thoroughbreds? Galton assumed that there were certain good genes and certain bad genes in the human gene pool.
The movement Galton spawned became known as the eugenics movement. The word eugenics literally means good birth. The eugenics movement resulted in restrictions on who could and could not marry, involuntary sterilization, and even forced abortions in many cases. In America, tens of thousands of those deemed unfit were forcibly sterilized by the state. Even the U.S. Supreme Court declared the practice constitutional in 1927, a decision in which Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. famously declared, "3 generations of imbeciles are enough," thus clearing the way for a Virginia woman to be sterilized against her will.
Eugenics essentially argued that there were certain population centers that were so polluted with bad human genomes that they simply needed to be eliminated.
Though it is frequently ignored now, Planned Parenthood is a direct result of the eugenics movement in America. Its founder, Margaret Sanger, believed in removing what she called, quote, "the dead weight of human waste," unquote.
That's why Margaret Sanger would say things like, our purpose is to raise up a new race of thoroughbreds. She talked about eliminating human weeds.
And the eugenics movement of the 19th and 20th centuries had an enormous influence on the policies of Adolf Hitler's Third Reich.
I mean, Goebbels sounds like Margaret Sanger and today's Planned Parenthood and NARAL people when Goebbels talks about useless eaters. Well, I mean, it's about the ugliest term I've ever heard, useless eaters, human beings with the spark of the divinity in them. They don't see humans that way. They don't see humans as an engine of creation. They see them as, you know, depriving the earth of resources, useless eaters, or unwanted babies.
Adolf Hitler was clearly trying to speed evolution along, and he wasn't the only one. He was drawing on what many other scholars, biologists, geneticists in Germany were also preaching and teaching in the early 20th century. Natural selection was a guiding idea for Hitler and the Nazis. In Mein Kampf, he talks a good deal about the struggle for existence and how humans are struggling, especially races is mainly where he's focusing there, but in other places too he talks about even within German society there's a struggle for existence going on which brings about natural selection. And they used the word selection quite freely, and in fact if you read just about any books about the Holocaust you'll come across the word selection, because in the camps that's exactly what they did, and they used the term, and the term was related directly to Darwinian terminology, that when you went to the camps, you went through a selection process. They were selecting this person to survive and this person to go to the gas chambers.
Hitler's Mein Kampf refers to evolution quite a bit, but the English translator of the book uses the word development instead of evolution. Neither Charles Darwin nor his immediate followers were anti-Semitic per se, but their ideas just made the whole thing possible.
He saw races locked in competition, and in The Descent of Man he explains this, and that because of that different races will be exterminated. Now he didn't necessarily believe the Jewish race was one of those inferior races that would be exterminated, but Hitler of course did, and he began applying that to Jews. Anti-Semitism had existed for centuries before Hitler came along, but no one tried to exterminate the Jews. For Hitler, extermination was necessary because it's the only way to rid the Jewish blood from the gene pool.
Adolf Hitler fancied himself an intellectual. He was always referring to Darwin and to the science of Darwinism as a reason and as a support for his racist theories. And in that you bring in science, and the Nazis loved science, then this sort of gave it the blessing of modern liberal thinking, of scientific thinking. And so Darwinism and the idea that you had superior races, that you had the fittest surviving, certainly underlay the Nazis in their thinking.
Before the systematic destruction of Jews and Gypsies and Slavs and other supposedly inferior races, the Nazis killed off tens of thousands of the chronically ill.
The Nazis began a so-called euthanasia program in 1939 when World War II began. And they carried these out by setting up 6 killing centers that was to get rid of people who had congenital illnesses of various sorts. Most of these were institutionalized people who were shipped from various institutions of Germany, then to these 6 killing centers. The total numbers the Nazis killed are difficult to pin down for a number of reasons. It depends on who you're counting. The numbers of Jews killed were about 6 million, Gypsies 600,000 to 800,000, the euthanasia program about 200,000, but then there were also several million Soviet POWs. I mean, we're talking about in the neighborhood of 10 to 15 million, though, likely.
Once the killing began, it never stopped. A private meeting was held at the Wannsee Conference Center where they decided on the final solution, as in the final solution to the Jewish problem, the decision to exterminate the Jewish people.
They did refer to Darwin. At the Wannsee Conference, Reinhard Heydrich commented at the end, Darwin would be astounded at the progress we're going to make in 1 year as we move the human race forward.
The reason that the Nazis killed the Jews was because they believed that they had bad heredity, didn't want it to infiltrate the German gene pool, and they believed that they were a threat to